most everyone must be aware that Georgia-Pacific, i.e. Koch brothers, intends to sell off the headlands bit by bit, however they can get rid of it and just get out of here. At least that's what I would say my take on it. But it's more than just get out of here, because they want to leave us a gift. And that is a gift of a highly contaminated headlands with poison spread across those 400 acres. And so we got together out of a concern for that, but also out of a concern that really we wished that instead of having that discussion, we could be having a discussion that was oriented to the future and not to the past, and orienting to about how we could turn this wonderful place we live in into a commons, and into a place where the public came first, where the people came first, and not the interests of developers and real estate people and so on, which always seems to be, unfortunately, the case. Well, I'd rather have that discussion, but that's not the discussion we're going to have tonight. We're going to have a discussion about what's going on now and what, if anything, we can do about it. We'll have two speakers, and they'll both be brief, and we'll have time for questions and answers. Our first speaker will be Jim Tarbell, who I just introduced. I think many of you will know Jim. He's hiding back here. He's shy. But if you've been paying attention at all, you know Jim because he's been involved here on the coast for, well, I think all of his adult life, and working on projects that are intended to enhance the value of life here on the coast. He's edited magazines, he's written articles, he's a teacher at the college. He's sort of just, your typical man of all trades, and he's going to open the discussion. I'll just say briefly, he'll be followed up by a second speaker. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at some of the specifics of what we face, and then at the same time put it into the context of a bigger picture of problems and issues which we're all familiar with, I think. So that's what we're trying to do. Ignacio Chapela, I'm sure many of you know as well. Ignacio has been up to Mendocino County many times. He was involved in the anti-GMO campaign on the other side of the hill. He's spoken many times in the community over here. He's been on KZYX, at least on my program, 2 or 3 times. So if you know him, I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing him talk again. If you don't, you have a pleasant experience to look forward to. Ignacio, I'll just say now, is an associate professor at the University of California at Berkeley in ecology. He's well known, he's a microbial biologist. He's well known for a couple of things: his work with GMO crops and his work especially in tracing the paths of contaminated seeds from North America south, from here south. He's known for that. He's also known for giving the university a bad time about its links to corporate America and being a constant thorn in the side, really, of the powers that be on that big, lovely campus. So that's what our program is. Let's start off with Jim, and if you have any, we're being filmed and we have microphones, so if you have any problems hearing or whatever, just let us know right away and we'll sort it out.
All right, hello everybody. Hello. How are you? Thank you all for coming. And I was going to do a little housekeeping here. Somebody asked me where are the restrooms here. Well, the restrooms are out the door to the right, out of that hall, and they're outside. Anybody who needs to go to the restroom. And thank you, Cal, for that nice introduction. It's nice to be here. It is quite a propitious time to have this conversation going on about the mill site, because the mill site closed almost 20 years ago. And there's been stuff going on, there's been a cleanup going on, there's been a couple of planning processes going on, but nothing has really happened except for the trail, the coastal trail that the city put in, which is pretty fantastic, and the growth of the Noyo Center. But otherwise, nothing has happened. But in the last 6 months and the last year, suddenly things have really taken off. And as a lot of you know, if you saw the headlines on the Advocate today, the Georgia Pacific has sold the northern 77 acres of the mill site to the Hart brothers, who are the owners of Sierra Railroad, which is the parent company for the skunk train. They have all kinds of plans around that. They say they want to put a rail line out by the coastal trail, put a railroad terminal out there by probably by that parking lot on the northern end of the coastal trail, and they want to put a big resort hotel out there, and they have other plans. But the interesting thing is this whole mill site is only zoned timber industrial, which means all you can do out there right now is to have a lumber mill. So it's a long ways between here and their dreams, and there's going to be a lot of public participation, a lot of opportunity for that, and I hope you all stay engaged in this conversation. The city is involved in creating a amendment to their local coastal plan, which is what they're going to have to do to rezone that property. And they have to do this through the Coastal Commission. So the Coastal Commission is going to have the last word here about what's going on. And I think it was pretty brave of these guys to put their money down on a piece of property they don't know what they're going to be able to do with, but that may be the fact. That they may be sorry, who knows? Who knows? I hope it works out for everybody, I hope it works out for them, works out for the city, and works out for all of us. The other thing that happened, of course, is that Tom Honer and Honer family, owners of Harvest Market, bought 15 acres just right next to the Cypress Street entrance, just north of the Cypress Street entrance. Also, I don't think he's made any announcements of what he's going to do with it, but it is, as Cal says, it looks like Georgia Pacific is starting to parcel off the parcels that the Department of Toxic Substance Control has said are clean and not under toxic controls. Although George has pointed out that a lot of the property that the Hart brothers have bought still has some title restrictions on what they can do with that property because of contamination on the soil. So, and the cleanup is still ongoing. The cleanup is not done. And one of our fears is, of course, as Cal was pointing out, is that GP will sell off all the small parcels and then essentially leave town. Although they are under a court order from the Department of Toxic Substance Control to clean up the full mill site and can be fined up to $25,000 a day if they don't do it in a timely manner. So these are all big questions. We're all should stay involved. And when the cleanup happens, there will be, or when the next part of it happens, and what is not cleaned up is the entire mill pond, which is the most contaminated part of the mill site. There will be remediation plans and more opportunity for public input. Last year, the Department of Toxic Substance Control told Georgia Pacific that they thought everything looked pretty good, that it was all clean, and that if they could just kind of close off all that mill pond area and kind of fence it off, and as long as the berm was good and the dam was good, that was fine. But then they realized that they hadn't really been considering ocean level rise or climate change and what that's going to do. Because the dam is precarious, it's been under an order by the Department of Dam Safety to be fixed up since 2004, I think. And that's what's holding back all those toxins from the mill pond. So, and now the Department of Toxic Substance Control is telling GP that they have to do a lot of tests to make sure that that dam is going to be okay, and that the berm down by the beach is going to be okay. But if you see maps of what the ocean rise is going to look like, if there's 4 degrees of centigrade change, that whole area down there is ocean. The ocean is no doubt just going to wipe out all infrastructure protecting the mill pond. And it would be best for everybody if that was cleaned up before that happens. So those are some of the things going on. Of course, there are some exciting ideas of what might be going on. There's ideas about daylighting the creeks. The consortium George is part of has been working on this. George has been promoting this for years. There are two creeks that come into the mill pond, Maple Creek and Alder Creek. And they now feed they're the storm drains for the city. They're the ones that feed the mill pond, but they can be taken back to their old historic paths and down to the beach with a nice estuary down at the beach. I think would be a beautiful thing. And with all this happening, there have been lots of calls for engagement. I don't know if you all saw the editorial in The Advocate this week, but there's a big editorial by Chris Calder, great editorial, saying we've got to be involved, we've all got to be involved. I also read that Richard Becker, one of the teachers at Fort Bragg High School, has been having his students for 6 years study the mill site, figure out what the environmental problems are, what the economic opportunities are, and then report back. And a week or so ago, they gave reports to a lot of our public officials and their staff about that. So it's great to see everybody engaged. Of course, Cal told you the Mendocino Institute has become engaged, put on some radio programs. And one of the things we're doing is, as he says, trying to put it within a historical and a global context about what the reuse of this mill site is about. Look at how it fits into our current economic system, our current political system, and our current environmental system. And when I say the economic system, the not Georgia Pacific, but the experience in Fort Bragg with the mill site is a great example of how our economic system has worked. In the 1880s, you remember this is the time of the robber barons, very wealthy Wisconsin and Michigan timber family came out and bought all of what is now Fort Bragg and a lot of the lumber mills all around. It was very much in the fashion of the trust building that the Rockefellers did. And he did this with the help of some of his friends who were U.S. senators, a friend who was a governor, a senator, a general. There was a lot of big East Coast money, or big Midwest money. You can in fact watch how the big timber money moved across the northern United States, from Maine, across the upper Midwest, and to the West Coast, cutting down all the trees and creating huge wealth for these companies. And this was the Johnson Company. In fact, they started here in the 1880s. 100 years later, in the late 1980s, just to show what this, I mean, it was, of course, virgin redwoods when they came. But all that money came in and essentially destroyed the forest. In the 1980s, Pete Passoff, who was the UC timber advisor, said, "Oh, the industrial timber companies are over harvesting the forest by 200%." And there was a FRAP report from the state that said, "Oh, the whole timber industry is going to come to an end early in this century, in the 21st century." And that's exactly what we've seen. So that money came in. So that's how our economic system has worked. Big money comes in, takes all the resources, destroys all our assets here, and leaves. So that's the world according to Jim, anyway. And then if you look at our political system, of course, as we said, we were talking about that the city council has a role here, our elected officials, the Coastal Commission has a role here. They are not elected officials, but they're appointed by our elected officials. But also remember that money is a huge part of our political system. And money power is a big part of our political system. Georgia Pacific and the mill site are all owned by Koch Industries, which is owned by the Koch brothers, which are huge political operators in this country and big organizers of money in politics. So there could be some big elephants out there that we're not seeing that could be impacting what's going on here. And then, of course, there's the environment, that the economy, our economic system just disregards all the costs of environmental pollution, resource depletion, the loss of all our trees, climate change. And so we have to put all this reuse in that sort of a context. So anyway, I was going to mention a couple of other things. Well, of course, Mendocino Institute put this on, but we also have a petition online, and you can go to the Mendocino Institute website at www.mendocinoinstitute.org and sign the petition. The petition's headline says, "Save 400 acres of Fort Bragg headlines, clean up first for a healthy Mendocino coast," and that's really our point. Is that we need a healthy mill site to really have a healthy future here on the coast. And in fact, we're going to continue this conversation. And in fact, tomorrow we're holding a symposium. It's a sold out event, so there's no more room for anybody. But I think we'll have symposiums further down the line and more events. And if you're interested, talk to George or myself or Cal or Bill Lemos, who also is part of our operation here. And we'll see how you can fit in and how you can get included in all of this. And but if you want to really see it, Mendocino TV, of course, right now is filming all of this, and it'll be live streamed on the internet on their website tomorrow. Is that right?
Correct.
That's correct. In fact, this is probably being live streamed right now.
All except the audio.
Which
means
later.
It's useless right now, but
Later.
we'll fix that tomorrow.
Later, okay. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and I'll hand off the meeting to Cal, Ignacio, or...
Okay, thanks, Jim, and we'll have a chance to talk to Jim, but we'll go ahead with Ignacio first. There are more chairs just in the other room. Is everybody, and there's a chair there, there's a chair here. Anyway, I guess, but there are if it turns out that we need them. I just thought I would tell you about our petition. I've never done anything like this before, but we set up one of these internet petitions, and today it's been out there for just 2 weeks, and today we passed over 2,000 signatures for demanding that the mill site be cleaned up first. I felt that that's been quite inspiring, because you can also make comments on these petitions. I'm a newbie at this sort of stuff, you could probably guess, but anyway, you could make comments, but overwhelmingly of hundreds of comments that have come in with 2,000 signatures, people have said, there's been one theme over and over and over again, this is a beautiful place, we need to protect it, we need to protect the ocean, we need to protect the earth, and that's why I'm signing this petition. Ignacio Chapela, Professor of Ecology at the University of California at Berkeley.
Thank you. I just want to thank first the privilege of the invitation by Cal, by the Mendocino Institute, but also, more importantly, I think, the incredible show of presence that you have. This is really daunting. To see so many people in this extraordinary landscape, this extraordinary building, on this extraordinary day, you know, the solstice, which is such a special day, of an extraordinary year, in an extraordinary epoch of our times, that you guys obviously are taking seriously and are taking in your hands. So it's really humbling to see you active, engaged, and doing something. For those of you who want to fall asleep soon, I have some remarks, and I will be maybe a little bit complicated eventually, but the message I feel like I have for you after considering and thinking and studying the materials that I have been reading about this, I'm an outsider, but I can understand your situation to some extent. The message that I feel I have as a scientist is that taking the here and the now makes sense in the face of the apparently disempowering forces that we are continuously reminded of. The size of the problems, the burden of guilt that we are continuously put on our shoulders. Taking the here and the now, deciding that this is where it is going to happen, whatever it is that you decide that it is going to be, is something that makes sense from a scientific point of view. I was asked to speak, to make some remarks in an extremely open sense, talk about science, talk about global warming. I think that's on the title of whatever made you come here. And then on top of that try to make it connected with the situation locally here. And I'm happy to try and do that, but of course that's impossible, as you can tell, right? And I would much rather hear what you all have to say if I could get away with it. But they sat you facing this way, so I better deliver something that is coming from me onto you. My intention is, because many of you have been waiting here already for almost an hour, my intention is to try and be brief. By my count, I have 7 chapters to what I had to say. I'll try to make them quick so that you know, I will let you know when chapters are changing. And if you feel like it's too long, just say, jump to the last chapter, right? And I expect that to last perhaps half an hour. Does that sound reasonable? Sure. Raise your hand if it doesn't. It doesn't? Okay. I need to make some clarifying remarks to start with. A little bit about myself and what I feel I'm doing here. I think I'm helping to facilitate a process. I'm helping to, as an outsider, to bring in questionings that might be more difficult to do internally, locally. And I'm also, I think, hopefully serving as a punching bag for all of you to work out some of the questions that you are going through. And I'm happy to play that role. I need my glasses. I intend to be a scientist when I grow old. It is an ever-changing quest, and it is a form of life. It is a difficult task, especially when you intend to become a biologist. I have been trying since I was maybe 15, maybe younger than that. I'm dedicated to that. So I do bring intentionality into this, and my intention to deal with this seriously as a scientist, as a biologist, but it is a difficult task. In the last 22 years, I've had the privilege of dealing with young people. Up to that point, I was a plain researcher, pure researcher. My social sciences and humanities colleagues were very jealous of me that I hadn't had to teach seriously until pretty an advanced stage in my career and my life. But for the last 22 years, I have been teaching at Berkeley, and that's an incredible privilege because I learned how to relate to those new generations as they come through Berkeley. And from that, I learned that the most important part of my role is not to tell people what to think, but to help those young people to figure out how to think about different difficult problems. What you have in your hands is what sociologists call a wicked problem, right? A problem for which there is no individual specific solutions that everybody can agree upon. A problem that is so complex in its causes and its developments that it's very hard or impossible to come up with an answer that everybody will agree upon. And so dealing with wicked problems is what we do in environmental science. It's what we do in trying to train the young people who come out of what's called conservation and resource studies at Berkeley, which is the one alternative environmental science part of the campus. And again, I take that seriously. And the first thing that needs to happen in that process is to help people, and students especially, deal with this big word. Which is the first word that I was given to talk to you about or to engage with you on. It is a very difficult word to deal with because at the very least there is a big central problem. And I want to keep it here, I'll put it on the wall so we get reminded of this difference, because often in these discussions, people use the word science very lightly. They just throw it around and they use it as a way of just supporting whatever argument they have and so on, without realizing that what we mean by this word is at least two very different and opposing things. There is a science that I call big S science, and a science that I called little s science. Not very clear, right? Webster's dictionary wouldn't have dealt with that difficulty. Under big S science, I understand a practice by people who inhabit the same buildings where I teach, where I do research, in the same institutions, in the same societies, and so on. But these are people who are in their practice seeking truth. Many of your high school science classes were focused on the idea that science was about truth finding. And if you believe that, if you believe that there is a truth out here that you can approach by dedication, by study, by following on the steps and standing on the shoulders of giants and all that, from the past, you will very quickly recognize that this way of understanding science leads you to people who are closer to that truth, and then people who are not that close, but could develop by more attention or being, sometimes people say smarter, would be able to listen to those who are closer to that truth. And what you end up with is a pyramidal system with higher echelons of society who are closer to truth, who can tell you what to think, not how to think. And then lower groups of society who should just shut up and listen. How many times have you heard that? How many times have you heard that? Probably in city councils, right? Let's bring the scientist. Let's see what the scientist has to say. And then everybody shut up because the scientist is closer to truth. On the other hand, you have the little s science that is a completely different practice. It is a practice that is not really about truth finding. It is about questioning. It is about doubting. It is about trying to figure out not how it is that I'm right, but how can I demonstrate that I am wrong? Those of us who are practicing the experimental method, this is exactly what you have to do all the time. You don't set up experiments to prove yourself right. You set up experiments to prove where you can be wrong, and you are really happy when you demonstrate that you were wrong in your assumptions, because that allows you to change your mind, to figure another way of understanding, to see the world in a different light. So I very much welcome the invitation to think about this under the aegis of the word science. But I have to declare that I do not accept this way of going about it. I could talk for an hour about this and how this way of doing big S science leads to a religion-like practice, a religion-like institution, a religious-like institution, and so on. I do not go with this. I am going with this other way of thinking about science as a way of questioning in which people are interconnected and equally or more or less equally able to question and think together. And we have here Ian Ball, who will be talking tomorrow too, running a workshop. And I really like Ian's definition. Ian is a historian of science, and his definition of this little s science is easy to remember because it's only 4 words, Ian. Sustained, collective, critical inquiry. Sustained, collective, critical inquiry. Questioning in a way that is transparent so that others in the collective can also question. Do it in a way that is permanent and sustained so that we don't give up on our questioning. Even when we do not find good answers, we might wait 2,000 years. I'm happy to be working and following on the steps of someone who was asking these questions 2,000 years ago. We are a collective that spans space and time. And so sustained, collective, critical inquiry, which is this attitude, this way of living that is about questioning what it is that you're doing. So If I may just put this on the wall, Lisa, could you please help me? My darling Lisa. And I think we put it on those lines so that we don't, it's artist tape, so you shouldn't worry about your wall. If you need more tape, there's more tape up here. Chapter 1, that was chapter 1. The end of chapter 1 says, proper science has a 3-stage practice in which we first describe, that means I try to be as accurate, as careful about my perception and my taking note of reality, right? Then, and only then, we model, which in a way is a way of understanding. What that means is, I try to match that description of reality against my preconceived idea, or any idea that I might form about that reality. How does it fit into that perception of the world? This is a metaphoric work. This is something that poets do very well, right? That's what poets are always doing. They're always trying to fit reality or fitting reality into new metaphors of how the world is put together or relates to each other. And so there is this very strong element of poetry, if you will, in the modeling and understanding part of the scientific process that I think is very, very important, but also very prone to claims of truth, confusing the model for reality, even confusing description of reality for reality is a problem that a critical scientist should be really aware of. Whatever they tell you about how pollutants move in sediments, or whether a certain amount of pollutant is or not important for health of wildlife or humans, children, old people, women, men, whatever they tell you about that is always based on a model. You might have numbers of how many parts per million or parts per billion of dioxins you have in those sediments, but how you interpret that goes through this process of modeling. And then finally, not only a critical but a responsible scientist is someone who will do one third step, which is norm. What does that mean? It means judging. It means fitting the understanding model onto a moral or ethical model. Whatever it is that we feel is good, whatever we feel that is desirable, and matching that reality to that normative background. So again, in the discussions that I'm sure we're going to be having tomorrow, for example, it's super important to recognize that difference and then this process. If we may just get rid of this. End of that. Any comments, questions, disagreements? Answers? But we're supposed to think about global processes. You all are people who are really connected to the world through the internet, through the newspapers, if that such a thing exists still, and are really aware of the world. Part of your problems and part of the difficulties that you find is that you actually know a lot about the world. And so thinking about the global situation is something we're supposed to talk about. Are we doing okay there? Or is this, Lisa, is that okay?
Yeah.
Global change is not something new. It's not something even that's 100 years old. It's not something that even in the models, the understanding of global change is recent. I was trying to get through the biography of Alexander von Humboldt. And if you read about him, you discover that he knew perfectly well and had very strong models about global change, and even the impact of human activities upon global change. But global change becomes much more visible, much more conscious, much more present in recent times. But I think one of the really important things to remember about this is that the perception of global change has only become so evident once we have a breakdown of scales, of boundaries. So the important words here. And a collapsing of scales. In biology, we have one extra dimension when we think about these questions. Physicists and most people out there on the street think about scale and boundaries simply from the point of view of time and space, right? That's what we're always taught to think about, time and space, scale of global change. Something that is happening in Russia might be affecting the sea level rise in Mendocino County, and so on and so forth. That's space. In time, something that is done today is going to have consequences reverberating hundreds of years ahead of time. Sometimes they will become bigger as time goes by and so on. So time, space, but in biology we have, in addition to that, the dimension of phylogeny. Nice word that implies history. Implies a history through descent. What becomes inherited and passed on from one time to another through a continuous line of descent of life forms. The inheritance of life forms. And I want to note that this is a dimension that physicists and engineers almost never take into account, the dimension of phylogeny. So it is in biology that many of the questions that are really difficult to grasp when you're thinking about what's happening in the headlands, for example, has to do with the discounting of this phylogenetic dimension. The global change problems, if you think about it, once they become really global, have to do with the breakdown of certain boundaries that existed that maintained flows and exchanges within those boundaries, and all of a sudden these boundaries get broken, so you have increased rates of flow and exchange across these boundaries. Think of the Atlantic, for example. Once the Atlantic is broken to trade, of course many people were traveling across the oceans for many, many thousands of years before that, but the actual intense exchange of stuff across the Atlantic becomes much more intense, much more recently, right? And you can think about this, chapter 2 is over, you can think about this from the point of view of why this breaking down of boundaries happens. So again, von Humboldt is not a coincidence that people in the 1700s, the mid to late 1700s, you could go back to the 1600s, would be the people who became more conscious about this. What way, where were they thinking about these problems? On a ship, usually, right? They were on a ship where they were seeing the intensity of these exchanges. It's not like the ship was just traveling by itself like they do in the Discovery Channel, right, where they have the little ship going across. There were massive numbers of ships battling each other, pirating each other, dragging stuff from one place to the other since the 1400s and even before. It is this that we can see as the root of this massive exchange and massive breakdown of boundaries. The intensity of exchange and movement becomes so much more intense after this time. What is happening there? What are these people doing? What is this exchange about? Well, I would posit that this exchange is about, do we still have paper? I was told not to put more paper down. Well, I have more paper, but I don't want to bore people too much. I'm not bored. Okay. Lisa, can you help me put up another piece of paper? It's right here. It's easy to do. Let's do it together. What these people were doing, they were following and simply amplifying a process that really, I feel, started about 10,000 years ago with the beginning of agriculture. It is a process of concentration . Think of the agricultural, the seed that becomes possible, the grain that becomes possible about 10,000 years ago all around the planet. Interesting problem to think about. Why did it happen all across the planet? But we won't go there today. About 10,000 years ago, in many different parts of the planet, plants started producing these grains that you could pull ecological resources out of the soil, water, but especially nutrients, energy, and put it in your storage house and concentrate ecological resources, right? Concentration starts then, but by the time we're talking about the 14, 15, 16, 1700s, what's going on there is a really exaggerated process of concentration of whatever resources were available to pull away from individual localities. Small places become extracted. So I forgot to say extraction would be the first one, right? Concentration. You extract, you concentrate. Once you concentrate, you are able to speculate with this, right? You are able to monetize. Eventually, and there are a few more steps here, but the important one here is you're able to financialize. The process becomes a process of extraction, not only of material, but also of individuality and uniqueness. What made specific fields unique becomes homogenized by the use of agricultural crops. What made specific metals in places of South America, for example, becomes homogenized in the ingot of gold, as ballast of the ships, for example, right? It's exchangeable, it's tradable, it's commodifiable. It's a commodity. So the commodification, this whole process, is what we call commodification of ecological resources. In the end, everything really boils down to that, right? So what's happening in the 1700s is that this process is being really exacerbated through transportation and through the use of levers, leveraging your powers to do this process. First of all, mechanically, through engineering, steam, the use of the laws of thermodynamics. All of these things are coinciding at that very time. So think about, for example, the use of the steam engine that just has as descendants these machines that we have outside our doors here, right? Really direct descendants, phylogenetically speaking, from that steam machine. But this leveraging is something, again, that is pretty recent and is self-catalyzing. What does that mean? It means that it enables more of itself, more of that same process to happen at faster and faster and faster rates. Eventually, we might want to think, because of our problems here, we might want to think about oil and the value of oil in the process of commodification, extraction, concentration, speculation, and so on and so forth. Do we need to go through this? Maybe I should, right? What is oil? Oil is biological stuff accumulated over millions of years that becomes concentrated through geological processes. So it's being done for us, right? Then extracted out and then utilized to leverage this process again in that catalytic kind of way. So that the rates at which we can continue to extract break boundaries and increase the rate of flows across boundaries becomes more and more and more accelerated. Fantastic process, terrifying process too, right? A process that can be applied, that is applied to all kinds of so-called resources. People call gold the same as corn grain, or the same as other people in slavery, right? These are resources, right? It can be applied to all kinds of resources, and it can be applied to a whole bunch of different processes. It's a diverse way in which we do this one process. The process of globalization, this process of globalization, once you recognize it as a process, we're bringing in people, we're hunting people in Africa and bringing them in ships to work in plantations in North America. Once you recognize that, there is a moment where you have to recognize the reality of that breakdown of boundaries, and you have to become responsible of that, right? Or not, but you have to face it. So this process of globalization and global change is one that forces us to face the reality of this connectivity between us and the world, the breakdown of those boundaries, but also it forces us to face the fact that this process is reciprocal. We thought that the slaves were going to come only one way and we could just do whatever we wanted. But it doesn't work that way. You pull oil from the bowels of the earth, and there is a reciprocal response to the breakdown of that boundary, right? And that response is all the things that we're talking about, right? One of the consequences of slavery, I guess, I don't know why I came up with slavery just now, but jazz is a fantastically good response. It is a reciprocal process of transformation that goes both ways. So global change forces us to face, number one, our connectivity across space, across time, and across that other dimension, what was it? And across phylogeny. Phylogeny. It forces us to recognize our connectivity across that. So by the time we get to our time, our connectivity with fungi, with bacteria, with whales, and with redwoods is not a simply poetic, there's nothing wrong with poetry, right? It's not simply a poetic statement, it's a scientific one. And it's one that we need to take into account really seriously. So when people talk in the Noyo headlands about it's okay for people but not for wildland, or the other way around, I ask myself, where is the breakdown in the models that are being used to understand this process? That we can think of this as separate and independent processes, when they're not. Yeah. Maybe you want to make comments, or yes?
I was just thinking when you were talking about the breakdown of boundaries, and I began, because that was very, had to do with geography and land and whatnot, and I thought that there's a huge breakdown in disconnectivity because of digital internet.
Sure.
And so I think that's an enormous boundary breakdown, because things are so fast now.
So the process of commodification, just to put your idea back into my frame, that is a very simplistic one. The process of commodification becomes accelerated and self-catalytic, right? And our colleague here is talking about how the internet is one more process through which this continues to be made faster and faster. As you go from extraction to financialization, by the time you get to financializing something, where the value of a piece of land, or a person, or a dump land in Jakarta can be exchanged at the push of a button, because it's simply numbers in a financial system, you have that other, you have captured value from that process, of course, right? You become a millionaire and you can have a house in Acapulco or wherever, on Mendocino, in exchange for dumping somewhere in Africa through this process of financialization, right? You become rich without even knowing why. But the reverse of that is that you become alienated. This is also a process of alienation from the physical and biological basis of what we are made of and what we are. So there's this going back and forth, this reciprocal nature of this process that often gets overlooked, and that I feel should be put squarely into whatever model we're using to understand any situation, locally or globally, in order to do something about it. And that's what I want to get to with my last two chapters. Is it okay if I do two chapters?
Yeah.
Okay. I ended the previous chapter by saying that globalization and global change is and has been for a long time a very bewildering kind of process. Bewildering because it involved many different people, many different ecosystems, many different processes of extraction and transport and all these things. It was incredibly bewildering. And there is something that happened in 2016 that I consider really significant. And that is the publication of the movie An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. It's a really important moment for me, or I use it as a stand-in for an important process of alienation in which the bewilderment with global change, the fact that we were all struggling with how is it that deforestation is happening in Brazil because of the hamburgers of McDonald's. Remember that? Those of you who are old enough? In the 80s, nobody was talking about these other things. That we were talking about deforestation in the Amazon, right? And then, whatever it was, Silent Spring, we were actually worried about pesticides. Who talks about pesticides today? Very few people, apart from you. You know that. What are we talking about today? We're talking about CO2, carbon footprints. And I think that is the genius, and I consider it a really perverse genius in Al Gore's movie and Al Gore's move. It's a political and financial move. Not only the movie made about $49 million, they invested 1.5 and they got like 52 million out of it. The movie itself was important, but something that was way more important was that they managed to get the whole world to develop a currency, monetization here, a currency to speak and to rationalize everything, this bewilderment of global change. So that CO2 became the coinage, the exchange currency. Brilliant move, right? Because on the one hand, those of you who do carbon footprint for whatever, however you fly to Europe and you are interested, some of the airlines that fly to Europe now tell you when you sit on the plane, they say, today we're going to be burning so many gallons of gasoline, and this is equivalent to this and that, and so many trees. It's kind of interesting when they say that. So that's kind of interesting and good. But thinking only about CO2 made it possible to again diffuse the specificity of each problem of each location, because CO2 is a gas. It can be moved very quickly from wherever produced it. So it also diffused responsibility, causal responsibility became diffused in one stroke. So you cannot hold almost anybody accountable for nasty things like pollution, like dioxins, like heavy metals, like e-waste, like all these things. Better talk about CO2 because nobody's really responsible. And nobody can do much about it apart from, plugging my nose and mouth and, dying or something. So it's a really interesting move, and I think it's a really important one because it's affecting us so directly and so intensely right now. That allowed us to both commodify the problem into one single currency, but I think in the American context, and the American context in its phylogeny, in a Puritan background on the East Coast, I would say, also allowed the commodification of guilt. The fact that we can all feel equally guilty because we are all responsible for the CO2. And so I try to breathe a little less or try to drive a little less. When in reality, someone else, a power plant is producing, I am nothing compared to that power plant. So simultaneously, it empowers me to be connected to the power plant, but it also disempowers me to be able to put my finger on any problem in the world and to try to resolve the problem of the world all at once through the CO2 currency. It's a terrifying thing. And in my experience, for us, and especially for young people that I deal with, it leads to paralysis. It leads to the feeling that there's nothing you can do, that there's nothing that you could have done anyway because you were born already a sinner. Younger people, they don't have that kind of language in their everyday speaking, but I can tell they feel guilty already by being born with a carbon debt that they will never be able to pay. It's just terrifying, and more importantly, it is paralyzing because it makes us simply subjects. How are we subjects? We're subjects whenever we talk about ourselves as consumers. We're simply consuming and breathing the sinful molecule of CO2. That's it. That's who we are. Reduced to nothing and unable to do anything else. Coming to my final chapter. This, in my mind, gets combined with the remnants or the shock waves of the population bomb, the concept that the world is overpopulated and that more of us sinners, is only going to make the world worse and worse and worse, and there's no return from that. Those of you who really want to change your mind about this, remember that we're talking about little less science, being able to change your mind. Those of you who have this idea about the population bomb and want to change your mind, I strongly, strongly recommend that, that you read a little more. How many people have seen Hans Rosling's videos online? 2 people, the young people. Yeah, hi. How are you?
Could you
So
spell that?
I'm going to write it here where everybody can do it. It's called The Young People Know About This. Rosling. And he died a few years ago, but he was really good online and on conferences online. Really, really nice presentations. But the bottom line of his argument that is produced from a sociological and demographic perspective of really counting people and doing population projections and so on, is that the problem of the world in the future, by the time you and I are gone, but soon, when those young people are about our age, is going to be underpopulation. Europe and many other places are already seeing this problem. And it's coming in many other places, except, for example, Mexico, and I think some other very religious country where that is not happening. But most countries are actually losing population and losing the bottom of that big population bell that you are all familiar with, right? So the young people are not here for us to retire and all that. So the problem is going to be underpopulation. But coming back to CO2, complicated with this time bomb idea that many people are here, makes us even more paralyzed. those of you who want to, again, think again about the population bomb. I do it with my students. I ask them to calculate the volume of living humanity. How many people, if you take all people on the planet, put them in a blender, living people, and then pour them, where do you fit them? Where do they fit? And the answer is, I'm going to say it here quickly, is from here to, I think I wrote it down. Just up the street. I wrote it down, I forgot where. It's a mile, a third of a mile on the basis, and a quarter of a mile high. It's a very small bucket. So if there's any question that we need to be on emergency alarm, etc., because we need to eat, that somebody needs to feed the world because the biomass of humans is so great and so on, please, let's think about something better than that. It's not working out. The population bomb is not working out, and it's not about that. So if we can liberate ourselves from that one, the population bomb, and the CO2 commodification of guilt, we feel, or I feel, that we would be in good standing. Look, final chapter. In good standing to turn away and refuse to be called a consumer, and start deciding that we really can do something. We want to do something. We want to do it here, and we want to do it now. And this is exactly where I see that you guys are. And I thought I was going to be speaking to 5 people and trying to convince them to talk to more, but obviously I don't need to tell you that. You're taking your local situation of the here and the now in your own hands. And yeah, the world might be going down to hell in a handbasket. But here and now, you are going to have a forward-looking, undivided, public, cleaned up, planned for the next 200 or 300 years, headlands in Fort Bragg. And you will not compromise for less than that. That, I feel, is why you're here and what you are up to. It is, I think, true, just to close, with a few truisms, just to question my own position on truth doesn't exist like that. Let me just say a few truisms that I consider to be real for myself, at least. And that is that life is not going to end anytime soon, at least not within our lifetimes or our children's or our grandchildren's. The multiplicity of life forms, perhaps, is really dwindling. It's something that I really mourn because I was born in a planet of plenty and a planet of incredible diversity of life. But there is a lie in that says that all those life forms are necessary. And I have been guilty of it in my classes too, of saying if we lose the insect here or if we lose the virus over there, the whole ecosystem is going to come to an end and it's going to collapse. I have to say I'm not convinced about that today. I was raised in Mexico City. And from that experience, I know that human beings can live in very depopulated environments and be happy. And that ecosystems can work like they work in the Midwest. Disastrously, but they're working. I believe that we don't need trees, just to get you riled up. That we can live in a planet without trees. I believe that global warming is not going to finish all that, but I don't want to live in a place like that. And I strongly believe that the point of all these things that we are doing, that you do, that I do, even by talking to you here, is to move away and liberate myself from the yoke of having to explain everything in terms of optimization and engineering maxima, and simply talk about a world, not that can function, not that can be survived, but a world that we actually desire, and desire for the future and future human beings who will be here. Thank you.
I'll call on questioners, or if you have a comment, just try to keep it short. But questions and comments, here's one.
I have a question for Ignacio.
Yes.
Can you review the dimensions of the space that all the human genetic material?
1 mile, 1 mile
By.
by 1/3. Today I have to transform it from kilometers to miles.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's 1 mile, 1/3 of a mile, and 1/4 of a mile high.
Great, thank you.
I think that's more than you need, actually.
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to ask if CO2 was a bad, kind of a bad measurement, would there have been a better way to describe,
So the question is, if CO2 is a bad measurement, would there be a better one to replace it with, right?
yeah.
There's so many answers to that, but my immediate one is, how about happiness? Well-being. That kind of measurement would probably be more interesting, I think, and more useful for action. But on the other hand, I don't think CO2 is a bad measurement. It does measure something, and it's really true that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it is probably very true that the increase in global temperature is related to CO2, but because we're focused on CO2, nobody's talking about methane. I'm terrified about methane compared to CO2, but we don't get to talk about it. Why? I don't know, because of Al Gore. I really don't get it. It's a very interesting process. So I'm not saying it's a bad measure. I'm just trying to invite us to be dialectical about this and say, look, this is a good measure, but it's blinding me and it's paralyzing me. And so the moment I feel paralyzed, I say, I need to do something different. Yes.
What's the ratio, the effect of the CO2 to effectively methane being released?
I think methane, molecule to molecule, methane
20
is
times.
20 sometimes, yeah.
But much less methane is released than CO2.
For the moment. But if you look at what's happening in the Arctic, there's a huge amount of methane, clathrates of methane in the permafrost, and also in the depths of the ocean. And this again is interesting in terms of scale, because this goes back. It's a beautiful story, that one actually. It's terrifying, but it's beautiful, because that methane, in many ways, is a memory of the old planet that is trapped and waiting to talk to us, if we so wish, anytime we want. And we are not considering the possibility that we might not really enjoy the old planet. You know, an old planet where oxygen was a pollutant. Remember that? There's an old planet that was reducing, and having oxygen there would kill you. Today we consider oxygen to be a great thing, but it's a pollutant from that old planet. So methane is it's a memory of that old planet that is being released, especially in the Arctic.
It's long-term reciprocation.
Long-term reciprocation, exactly. Same with oil, you could say, right?
Go ahead, yeah. Right here.
Yes.
So, yes, I used to teach ecology classes, and students would talk about the balance of nature, and I would counter, nature is always in balance. You just might not like the balance that it's in, which is what you were talking about. But you were also talking very poetically about a world without trees that we could survive in, but you would want to live in that world. We already are experiencing that, because we used to have a forest out in the ocean. I'm an oceanographer. It was called kelp forest. It's gone, and it's gone because of changes that are occurring in the ocean. So it's in balance in terms of what's happening out there. It's just what is happening, but it's a big change from what was there before. There was a change even before that. When the sea otters were extirpated, it brought a huge change to this area. But now with the loss of the sea stars, and now we have all the urchins and abalone are being pushed into the shallow water. So we are experiencing that loss already, and I think there's a lot of sadness in people because of that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it up. Every single case, I think, is very, very important to remember and to not let go and to not, to mention. At the same time, I think the idea that I was trying to convey is not necessarily the idea of imbalance, but the actual idea of rates of change is what changes. Rather than the actual thing, it is the process, and I'm sure you taught that way.
Peter?
I have one comment and one question with a big change in thinking. My comment is, viva la revolución del pensamiento.
Yes.
My questions are pragmatic in the extreme. Does the Toxic Resources Board have teeth to enforce a decision to look further on the Koch brothers? And a corollary to that question, who oversees the Toxic Resources Board?
Well, I didn't quite understand the whole question. Can you say that again?
My understanding from your description and that of the advocate today is that the Toxic Resources Board has said to the Koch brothers, you need to go back and do further analysis of what's under the pond. Does the Toxic Resources Board have teeth to force the Koch brothers to do that?
Yes, they do.
And what are those teeth, and who oversees the Toxic Resources Board in case the teeth don't work?
Well, the Toxic Resources Board is part of the California EPA. And they have, as I say, they can fine Georgia Pacific $25,000 a day if they don't continue the cleanup in a timely manner. I can't say, I'm not a lawyer, who's going to enforce that fine, but I would guess it would be the courts that would eventually somehow garnish money out of the Koch brothers.
But I will say, Jim, that,
George, this is George Reinhardt.
Yeah, the issue with our community and why that whole reassessment is occurring with what GP is being asked to do is because in May, when they came and said, well, we think it's pretty much okay, the community went berserk. They got over 200 critical comments about that, which is huge for a small community like ours. And it is really great that we have this turnout, and we have to keep staying a part of the process. And there are a number of things that give us hope or the reason to believe that we might get further right now than we have for a number of years. And that is because of the sea level rise implications, the preparation of communities for adaptation to what's happening. And this big mess, and the real mess is in, as far as I know, is in the mill pond and just below the mill pond, some of the most toxic ponds right down there. And they are completely toast with sea level rise. This is going to happen, probably going to happen pretty soon. The latest report is the Australian one that says, don't think this is going to be short-term, folks. I mean, long-term, folks. It's coming really quickly. And every week we hear new reports. So I think we need to keep communicating with the EPA. We need to keep coming to the meetings. We need to keep telling our city council and our planning commission how we feel about this. And it is really, really a powerful thing when a community uses its voice. If DTSC is looking at a situation and a corporation is saying, well, we think we're kind of finished here, and nobody says anything, that will prevail. But that's not what has happened over the last few years here, and we need to keep it up and actually raise our voices more.
More comments, questions? Yes.
Yeah, it's not on this subject, but you speak of our being here for many centuries beyond, or at least a few. And to listen to Guy McPherson and all of his stuff, that we have just a few years left before we will probably be consumed, probably by fire, or something like that.
There are plenty of people being consumed by fire. and continue to be consumed by fire. It's not a light matter. It's not like saying, oh, forget about it, it's not important. It is very serious. So I'm talking very broadly about a very large, with a very broad brush, trying to give a different way of thinking about this. So please, I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying that nothing is happening and the fires don't even exist, right? I mean, they are real and they kill people. The idea, it is true that whatever we're about to, or we have already passed, maybe 20 years ago or 30, I don't know, that tipping point that I think, talking about tipping points is very dangerous in many ways because it keeps doing that thing that we do, on the positive side, we do with paradise, remember? Where they say, forget about today, forget about here, because there's something much better coming up. We do the same thing on the negative, right? We say, it's really bad. 50 years ago, we would have never believed that we would be here, but the tipping point is still ahead. I think it's really important to take account of the moment now and say, it's bad enough. Enough people are burning today. We need to do something. So what happens from here to 200 years ahead, nobody really knows. Nobody knows, because the models are unable, scientifically proven, if that means anything, that the models cannot know anything at that distance, right? And so it's anybody's guess. My guess is that there will be people around. Few, maybe not driving cars, probably not driving cars, and not SUVs that are electric either. But will they be happy? I imagine so. I think we're so good at being happy. We really are. And that is beautiful in a way and also perverse in another because we can get used to terrible things.
Could think up a few more questions. I didn't do this at the beginning. We should really thank the Caspar community for this wonderful setting. We need to thank the Tarble Family Foundation for helping us to fund this program and others. We need to thank the Headlands Consortium for the work that they've been doing, and Nudge, that's a weird name, but Nudge is the, Noyo Headlands Unified Design Group, which steadfastly have been working for a decade on this. And also we should need to thank the Berkeley Collective Retort, which constantly sends a stream of brilliance up into the hinterland here. But here's the last round of questions. You want to? Yes, please. Oh, anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Go ahead. I'll come back to you.
The tension between the scale of the problem and happiness. It seems to me like you have to have, not you, but one has to continually balance in their mind, like what scale are you working at and how do you actually produce happiness or create happiness, or because you can't really think you're doing it like for the whole thing because you get so lost in like what is possible or not. So do you have any way of thinking about that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and of course my word is as good as anybody's here because it's based on experience, right? And each one of us has had very different experiences in life. My personal experience is that I can have two hearts, or that my heart can contain two feelings and two emotions like that, to work with. And one is the kind of motion that does this and pushes against something where I am convinced this thing has to move because it just has to, even though I know it's unlikely, even though I know it might not happen during my lifetime. I don't want to be found not pushing at the thing that needs to move, right? That's the one that you say it's impossible, it's forever. On the other hand, I need to have a heart that gives me the capacity to work on things where I can actually see that something is happening. This is where dealing with young people is such a fantastically powerful thing, because it's immediate, it's right there, and you feel it has consequence. And so I get an incredible outlet in teachers. We always do that, have an incredible outlet for that heart. But also working on something that you know you can win this one on the headlands. You know you can. I mean, I know from looking at you, I know that the law says that they have to have an approved environmental impact statement. I think they need to have a happy community. If the community says no, that is an actual law statement that they cannot move forward. So I just see that you can win that one. So in my lifetime, the balance between this kind of problem and the kind of problem that I know I can move is very, very important to keep whatever sanity is left in me. It's hard. Too hard.
A couple more questions.
Well, I just wondered if you would outline the schedule for the symposium tomorrow.
Begins here at 9 with introductions, and then Ignacio will speak again, and he'll be followed by Ian Bowl. And we'll have a tour of the headlands at lunchtime. Then there will be a couple of speakers. One, some of you may know Karina Nielsen, who's an oceanographer from San Francisco State University and is head of their marine science division. And Gail McLaughlin, I don't know if you know Gail McLaughlin, who is twice the mayor of Richmond, California, is going to talk about the battles with Chevron and others in the town of Richmond.
If I may correct you, even though you're the one who made the program, I was told, and I think it stands in the program, that what I'm doing is helping a workshop. So I'm hoping that for my part, that there will be a more dynamic kind of interaction, hopefully. Or I will try to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be what we call a working roundtable, where presentations will be short, just introductions to discussion. Yes.
Hi. So for folks that will be there tomorrow, what are ways that you're going to be disseminating what happens at the symposium? What are like next steps for people that are really interested in what's going on with the mill site? What are some benchmarks? What are some upcoming dates? Ways to communicate with the group that's here, stuff like that.
Well, for our, there are a number of groups. Our little committee, we're kind of newcomers to this and have been particularly concerned about getting this one particular issue of the cleanup out. So there are other ongoing groups like the consortium and like the other environmental groups. Whatever we do as a group, in a way, depends on what comes out of the discussions. We don't have a plan right now. What comes out of the discussions about, what to do practically? What do we need a vision of what we would like Fort Bragg to be like and the coast to be like? So we'll be talking about those things, but right now we don't have a timetable in that sense, and we're pretty open-minded, with the exception, I guess I think we're all pretty much agreed that we feel that we would like as much open space as possible in the headlands, that we are very concerned that commercial development be what actually is pushed forward by the companies and by the city, and we would hope that wouldn't be the case. So there are a number of things where we are agreed. We don't want a new lumber mill out there. I think that one of the problems that we have is a certain amount of nostalgia for times past, where people have a strange view of what industry was really like. when it was the dominant form of economic activity. So we're trying to look forward, and that's what I said at the beginning. We live in an area of fantastic recreational opportunities. We live in a beautiful area. We live in an area where we can think of lots more things to do than simply buy and sell things. So I guess George.
Well,
Can I add? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, for my part anyway, we haven't decided what tomorrow's about, what the outcome should be. But this turnout is very encouraging. And the question, I think, as the person asked it a moment ago, really frames what tomorrow should be about. Tomorrow should be about thinking, what I bring to this conversation is this notion that our Earth is bountiful and has regenerative capacity that is not particularly being expressed creatively when you start talking about putting a lot of asphalt out there and a bunch of businesses, because we've got to do something about the economy. I think we really need to focus on the regenerative opportunities for open space restoration, creek daylighting, and getting the health, the environmental health of the headlands as important a priority for our community as are these other questions, which are very important questions. But as a group, we want to see something along those lines where we're really talking about how does this all fit in with the notion that we really need to, notwithstanding what Ignacio is saying about CO2, one of the things we probably can do with some of these more regenerative agricultural and land use policies is begin to take carbon out of the air, put it back in the soil where it really does some pretty good stuff for us. It's not all bad. And, you know, really get this notion, yeah, absolutely. But I would say that the three of us who put this on, we're all coming from a different perspective, and I assume that's probably the case of everybody here. So keep yourself a part of the conversation and don't look for other people to tell you what's right.
So I wanted to point out that there is another session that Cal didn't mention tomorrow, and that is in fact about creating a healthy future here on the coast. And George and others are going to be ahead of that session. I wondered, George, if you wanted to talk about what that session would be like. And
well, just that it's going to kind of come, again, no particularly preconceived agenda here, but it will come late in the day when, you know, maybe we need to really think about how we do move forward, as the questioner inquired. And Maggie Barrett will be here, and Leslie Kashiwada, and I, and there may be one or two other people, but we'll be having this conversation in this room about, you know, what we might be doing and what our opportunities are. I really, you know, there's a NUDGE website, there's now a consortium website, there's lots of stuff you can look at and get a sense of where a lot of us are coming from. We're really talking about changing the focus maybe of what some of this LCP process has been like. Yeah. What's that?
When you watch that on.
Oh yeah, and so everybody, this is all going to be available on mendocinotv, mendocinotv.com. And so you can also tell friends about this happening, and it's really going to be, I think, a way for us to spread the word. I say this a lot, but I think our community and our region can be an example to other communities about regenerative opportunities in natural systems. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as background, if you haven't read Jim's article
Yes.
in this here magazine,
Back here.
yeah, there are a lot of them all over the place. Take a handful, pass them out to your friends, read it, because it really tells the history of the mill. It's a really good article, Jim.
Let's hear it further.
Other comments? Yes.
Thanks for being here, everybody. And I'd just like to make a comment. I used to live here in Caspar, and Jim and I and a lot of you folks went through a process where the whole town of Caspar was for sale. simultaneously there was a process going on in Westport and Albion, and so it seemed like all of our little communities were going to have one of our major organs cut off unless we felt empowered to create a sort of unified vision of what we'd like to see. And now it seems like it's Fort Bragg's turn. So I'm hoping that whatever does happen, that you guys all feel empowered, that you can set a vision, and that there will be some compromise and some give and take, but it's a beautiful part of the world. And if we focus too much on the poisons and the toxics, we're going to burn out. We've got to think about, you know, what we want to see for our communities, and we got to take the reins back from the big corporations and the companies, and we're going to tell them what we want. So that's just my big comment.
Thanks.